This is History Myths and Myth Conceptions. And today's myth is Roman Toilet Sponge. You probably heard this story. Romans used a sponge on a stick to wipe themselves. And they used this improvised brush in place of toilet paper, even in the public facilities. Basically passing the stick around and occasionally washing it in water or in a mixture of water and vinegar. Which is obviously not only disgusting, but also spreads diseases and therefore simply poses a serious threat to your health. The photos of ancient Roman latrines, toilets, are frequently used to explain that, first of all, it was a different society with different norms, and second, you shouldn't glamorize life in ancient times. That's true, it was a quite different society, and yes, we shouldn't pretend that ancient Rome was heaven on earth, because it wasn't. That said, the level of sanitation in ancient Rome was roughly comparable to the 19th century, and all these stories about savages using communal sponges are coming from very outdated ideas, and from this insane tradition of portraying Romans as some kind of degenerates. You know, this tradition when historians were just using their vivid imagination and telling nonsense about how the people who essentially created the foundations of our civilization achieved incredible technological level and introduced the system of laws on which modern jurisprudence is based upon, created numerous works of art, etc., etc. Well, in fact, all of them were just dirty barbarians who loved orgies, practiced vomiting at the banquets, enjoyed public executions, and they routinely exchanged feces with a guy next door using a special magic stick. All of these hilarious ideas were coming from the great minds who lived in the cultures where proper concrete wasn't still invented, connecting a toilet to a water supply was unheard of, professional sports didn't exist, and one of the earliest proponents of actual hygiene and germ theory was ostracized and then admitted into a mental asylum, where he was beaten to death, in the middle of the 19th century, I should say, in one of the most developed countries of the world. Since all of these researchers most of the time just couldn't understand how some of the stuff worked in ancient Rome, and they were brought up in a paradigm where, yes, Renaissance was an attempt to rediscover and implement the ideas of antiquity to life, but Romans, were persecuting Christians, according to church officials, which means they were in many ways subhumans. Well, for these reasons, they imagined quite a lot of weird stuff, usually based on very thin evidence and misinterpretation of the facts. But these ideas got a lot of traction, and some of them are still repeated up to this day, like this nonsense about gladiators killing each other, and Christians thrown to lions, and using a feather during the feast to induce vomiting. Anybody tried that? And yes, orgies, obviously, those famous Roman orgies. Back to the toilets. Yes, this sponge on a stick was a thing. It is mentioned in some of the sources, there are even some visual depictions of the device. It is called xylospongium or tersorium. The sources, and there are only a handful of them, don't tell us how it was used. Why would they? But from the context, you can figure out that it was a toilet brush. To clean the toilet, not yourself. Which is absolutely friggin' self-evident if you have eyes. Just look at this thing and use common sense. Don't listen to people who unearthed Roman toilets and couldn't figure out what was the purpose of this strange thing. With pipes and water supply. Why would you have water in the toilet? Why would you build public toilets? And yeah, I have to remind you that even the most advanced countries of the world didn't have public toilets up until the 19th century. So yes, a toilet brush is a tool and it serves its purpose. But no, you don't apply a toilet brush to your rectum, because it is mental. One famous inscription on the public toilet in Ostia literally says, "Use the xylospongium," this sponge and stick. This is a reminder to clean after yourself. A reminder you can see in some of the public toilets up to this day. Nobody leaves a reminder please wipe your butt. This is insane. Nobody needs this kind of a reminder. Since we don't really have explicit descriptions on how Romans cleaned themselves after visiting the toilet, we should use common sense. We should use logic, which lies in accordance with the existing data. So we could find a solution that doesn't involve passing the sponge around. Because let's be real, nobody's gonna do that. Neither you nor ancient Romans. And the most logical solution is obviously water. If the country has a sanitation system that puts to shame even the most developed countries of the 19th century, if they have running water in public toilets and they have sewers, well, it is the most logical theory you can have. Obviously, not all of the Roman toilets were connected to sewers and to water supplies, and obviously public toilets usually were quite disgusting places. The vast majority of modern public toilets are quite disgusting as well. But in general, water is the way to go. Actually, half of the world's population does that, right now. And it is far more hygienic than toilet paper. It is impossible to understand why some of the researchers start their thinking process with, oh, they didn't have toilet paper, so they needed something comparable. And then they stick to this idea and don't even notice that while describing toilets in Rome, they already mentioned first running water and then buckets of water, which presumably were used for cleaning this impossible sponge. You don't need toilet paper if you have a bucket of water. You just don't. And if you accept this theory, it changes your perception of antiquity a little bit. Public toilets with water tend to be reasonably clean. I mean, jokes aside, I've been to public toilets in countries like India or Thailand where sometimes toilet paper is not used at all. And trust me, they smell much less than comparable facilities in most of Europe. So let's not exaggerate the horrors of public toilets in Rome. Also, if Romans never used the communal sponge to pass around and then clean certain cavities in their bodies, it makes a bit harder to present them as dirty and stupid pigs. You know, the kind of people who have their level of squeamishness at zero. They stand knee-deep in feces, and they are so dumb they cannot figure out what causes this severe pain and bleeding in their precious rectums. Even an imbecile is capable of connecting the dots and figuring out that the communal sponge is responsible for a number of serious problems. Romans were not stupid, and they knew a thing or two about staying clean. They had baths, they invented central heating, they built colossal aqueducts, they had sewers. They had many things that historians of the 18th or 19th centuries didn't.